Hello, my name is Janet Harper. I am 58 years old, and for nearly 4 decades I was a devoted housewife in the quiet suburbs of Chicago. My life revolved entirely around my family. I built my days, my choices, and even my identity around caring for my husband, Edward, and our only daughter, Sophia. I believed that was my purpose: to love, to support, and to keep the home steady no matter what storms might come from outside. For 38 years I gave without hesitation. I thought my devotion was unshakable, and I imagined that my place in their lives was secure. But everything I believed to be permanent shattered in less than 3 days. In that short span of time, I was forced into a role I had never imagined. I went from being a loving mother to someone cast aside, unwanted, and painfully alone. Yet, just as quickly, the balance shifted again. By the end of those 3 days, I was no longer the abandoned woman. I became the one holding every card, the one shaping the outcome of the story. What unfolded had more twists and turns than any Hollywood script could dare to write. If you're still listening, we want to sincerely thank you for spending your time with us. Truly means a lot. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and let's see how far this message has reached. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I highly recommend doing it now so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just ordinary stories. They're filled with meaningful life lessons that can inspire, teach, and stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. 2 months ago, I was still Janet Harper, a widow trying to make sense of the silence that followed my husband's death. Edward had passed suddenly from a heart attack at the age of 68, leaving me alone in the house we had built together over nearly 4 decades of marriage. To me, it felt as though the ground itself had given way. Every corner of that home whispered his presence, from the armchair where he read his newspapers to the garden he used to tend on Sundays. I walked through the rooms like a ghost, clutching memories that now cut like shards of glass. My world, I thought, had collapsed forever. It was Sophia, my 35-year-old daughter, who came to me like an angel in those early days. She had built a brilliant career as a corporate lawyer in Chicago, someone admired for her sharp mind and elegance. When she wrapped her arms around me after the funeral, whispering, "Mom, you can't live alone in this big house. Too many memories, too much pain," I believed her. Her voice carried the same softness I had cherished when she was a child, the same warmth that had once melted Edward's stern composure. I let myself rest in her concern, grateful that even though I had lost my husband, I still had my daughter. What I didn't see then was the truth hiding behind her eyes. Sophia's gaze, tender on the surface, cloaked a cold, meticulous plan. She had always been Edward's pride, the perfect daughter he spoiled from the time she could walk. He boasted about her grades, her law degree, her polished career, as though her successes were extensions of his own. I never resented it. I was content in my quiet role. My life was in the shadows, making sure meals were ready, birthday parties sparkled, and clothes were always neatly ironed. I thought my sacrifice was understood, if not celebrated. I was wrong. Sophia had married Nathan, an ambitious real estate developer whose eyes gleamed at every mention of expansion projects and luxury condos. Together they had built a picture-perfect family, 2 beautiful children, and a future that seemed untouchable. After Edward's death, the couple began visiting me more often. At first, I thought it was kindness, a desire to make sure I wasn't swallowed by grief. But soon their visits shifted. They arrived with glossy brochures for retirement communities, their polished fingers tracing the photos of landscaped courtyards and cheerful senior lounges. "You'll love it, Mom," Sophia would say, her voice dipped in honey. "There'll be friends your age, activities to keep you busy, and you won't have to worry about the house anymore." Nathan nodded beside her, his smile rehearsed, as if they had practiced the pitch together. I wanted to believe them, but something in their tone unsettled me. Their kindness felt too neat, too packaged, like a sales presentation. Then came the day everything unraveled. Sophia arrived at the house not with gentle words or brochures but with 2 large suitcases. She set them down with a finality that made my chest tighten. "Mom," she began, her tone brisk yet falsely cheerful, "we've made a decision. Nathan's been assigned a major project here in Chicago, and we'll need this house. It makes sense, really. It's more convenient for us. Besides, this house belongs to me now, according to Dad's will." Her words struck me silent. Your house? But this is the home your father and I built together. This is my home. My voice trembled with disbelief. Sophia's smile never reached her eyes. It was thin, sharp, and strangely cruel. Dad left everything to me, Mom. The house, the bank accounts, all of it. You never handled finances, you never needed to. You were a homemaker. This is the way it's meant to be. The final blow came like a blade to my chest. You should find another place to live. There's no room for you here anymore. For a moment I could only stand there, staring at the woman I had raised, the daughter I had loved beyond words. My body felt hollow, my heart thudding with a pain deeper than Edward's death. I gathered what I could: 38 years of marriage, packed down into 2 suitcases and a single box of photographs. Each item I folded away carried memories. Christmas mornings, birthday candles, the smell of Sunday dinners. They were all reduced to luggage handles digging into my palms. Sophia stood in the doorway, glancing at her watch, as if my grief were a minor inconvenience making her late for an appointment. Nathan drove me to a shabby roadside motel called the Starlight Lodge. Its neon sign flickered against the dusk, casting a sickly light on the peeling paint and cracked parking lot. He handed me $150, the bills folded tightly in his manicured fingers. Think of this as a new beginning, Mom, he said, his tone almost casual. When their car pulled away, I stood in the fading light, staring into the rearview mirror of my memory. The home I had poured my life into was vanishing, shrinking with distance until it was nothing more than a ghost. I had never felt so betrayed, not by strangers, but by the very child I had once rocked to sleep. At that moment I realized grief could take many forms. Edward's death had broken my heart, but Sophia's betrayal shattered something far deeper. My belief that love, loyalty, and family were unshakable. I was left at the edge of a life I no longer recognized, clutching 2 suitcases and a box of photographs, wondering how 38 years of devotion could end at the doorstep of a motel called Starlight. I sat on the creaky bed of the Starlight Lodge, staring at the faded wallpaper and the dim light buzzing overhead. Everything smelled of mildew and resignation. My hands rested on the handle of my old suitcase, still packed, as if I were a traveler stranded in the wrong life. A hollow ache gnawed at me. Rage, sorrow, disbelief all tangled together. How had it come to this? Cast out of my own home, betrayed by the very child I had raised. As I sat there, a memory broke through the fog of despair. It was Edward, my meticulous husband, so careful about every detail. Years ago, he had shown me a document tucked neatly in a leather binder. His will. I remembered his voice that day, steady and reassuring. Janet, you'll be taken care of. I've made sure of it. The words replayed in my mind like a vow. Edward would never leave me with nothing. He had been many things, distant at times, stern with Sophia, but never cruel. No, something was wrong. The thought gave me strength. I decided I had to find Charles Whitaker, Edward's longtime attorney. If anyone knew the truth, it would be him. The next morning, I boarded a crowded city bus headed downtown. The ride was long, each stop feeling like an eternity as I clutched my purse, rehearsing what I would say. The Chicago skyline rose like steel and glass sentinels, cold but certain, reminding me that answers waited somewhere in those towers. Finally, I stood before the brass doorplate of Whitaker and Associates, my pulse quickening. Charles looked genuinely surprised when I entered his office. His hair was grayer than I remembered, but his kind eyes were the same. Janet, he said, rising to greet me. I thought you were traveling. Sophia told me you didn't want to attend the reading of the will. His words slammed into me like a thunderclap. Reading of the will? I never heard about any reading. My voice cracked with shock. Charles frowned and turned to his files. His hand sifted quickly through a stack of folders until he pulled out one marked Edward Harper. As he read, the color drained from his face. When he looked up, his voice was sharp with outrage. Janet, Sophia lied to you. According to Edward's will, you are the primary beneficiary. The house is yours, and you are entitled to 60% of the estate. That amounts to about $18 million. Sophia was granted only $5 million, and even that comes with a condition. She must provide for your care after Edward's death. If she fails, the funds revert back to you. My heart pounded in my ears. The betrayal deepened with every word. Sophia had stood before me, cold and certain, claiming everything was hers. She had shown me a false will, one she must have fabricated. The truth was right here, written in Edward's hand. The room swayed around me. Anger rushed through my veins, hot and overwhelming. I could barely breathe. Charles slammed the folder shut, his jaw tightening. This isn't just manipulation. It's fraud, elder abuse, plain and simple. Sophia and Nathan have committed a crime. We need to call the authorities immediately. But before I could even process the thought of police sirens and courtroom battles, Charles leaned closer, his voice dropping, as though the walls themselves might be listening. Janet, there is something else you need to know. Something Edward kept hidden from most of the world. I froze, my chest tightening again, this time with dread. What do you mean? Charles lowered his voice further. Edward worked with the FBI for years. He used his consulting firm as a front to infiltrate a transnational smuggling network. It was dangerous work, but he was invaluable to them. The estate, the $23 million, it's all legitimate, sanctioned by the Bureau. It was part of a cooperation agreement. The FBI allowed him to keep the funds as recognition for his service, and as leverage against the criminal networks he helped dismantle. My breath caught. Edward. My Edward, the man who gardened on weekends, who grumbled about rising property taxes, who kissed Sophia's forehead at her law school graduation, had lived a double life. I stared at Charles, words tangling on my tongue. Why didn't he tell me? Why keep something so enormous a secret? Charles sighed, his expression heavy with empathy. Because secrecy was protection. The fewer people who knew, the safer you were. Edward trusted me with the legal side, but he wanted to shield you from the danger. If anything were to happen, you were to be cared for. That was his promise. I sat back, trembling. Pieces of Edward's life I had never understood began to rearrange themselves. His sudden trips, the unexplained late-night calls, the moments when his eyes seemed to carry a burden he never put into words. All those times I had assumed he was simply distracted, tired, or weighed down by business. In reality, he was carrying a nation's secrets. The betrayal of Sophia still burned hot in my chest, but now another layer wrapped around it. The realization that my life had been entangled in shadows I had never seen. I had been living inside a story half told, my husband's devotion stretching far beyond the walls of our home. Charles leaned forward again. Janet, you have to understand what's at stake. This isn't only about inheritance anymore. If Sophia has already lied about the will, she may be trying to seize funds she doesn't fully understand. Those funds are tied, in part, to agreements with federal authorities. Mishandling them could trigger consequences none of us want to face. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. One betrayal had already gutted me. Now revelations piled on top of it, heavy as stone. My husband had kept me safe by keeping me ignorant. My daughter had exploited that ignorance to try to erase me. But the words Edward once spoke returned to me, steady and sure. Janet, you'll be taken care of. I opened my eyes and met Charles's steady gaze. Whatever came next. Police reports, FBI inquiries, the bitter confrontation with Sophia. I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Edward had trusted me enough to build protections I didn't even know existed. And I would honor that trust. For the first time since Edward's death, I felt something other than despair. I felt resolve, sharp and unyielding, rising from the shadows like a blade. The twist from the past. The motel room smelled of stale coffee and old carpet. The neon from the Starlight Lodge sign leaked through the curtains in blue slashes across the bedspread. I was still unraveling the revelation Charles had given me. Edward's secret work, the real will, when a plain parcel arrived at the front desk addressed only to me. No return address, no note. My hand shook as I tore it open on the plastic nightstand. Inside, wrapped in a single piece of tissue paper, was a USB drive. It felt ridiculous, and yet something about the anonymity of it steadied me. Whoever had sent this didn't want attention, but they wanted me to see what was on that tiny piece of plastic. I plugged it into the motel's cheap computer, my fingers moving like they belonged to someone else, and watched the screen light a rectangle into life. Edward filled the frame. He looked older than in the photographs that lined our mantel, the lines at the corners of his eyes deeper, his hair thinner. He sat in what I recognized as his study, the same green leather chair I had tucked quilts over when he dozed. He looked straight at the camera, and for a moment I could hear his breathing steady and certain. Then his voice, low, even the voice I had married, cut through the silence. "Janet," he said, and even on a recorded image it was intimate, as if he had turned to speak to me across the kitchen table. "If you're watching this, it means things went wrong. I've been worried about what people around me would do if I wasn't here to keep watch. I know my daughter. I know her ambition. I love her, but I have to protect you." He paused and I felt the air thin. I added a contingency to the will. "Not because I don't trust Sophia, God knows I wanted to, but because I couldn't leave you vulnerable. If she fails to fulfill the condition to care for you, the assets revert to you. If she tries to manipulate the process, there are recordings, signed affidavits, and legal instruments I've placed with Charles. I kept a copy with me, and I've left this message in case the worst happened. Janet, you are not alone." Hearing his words felt like a strange balm and a new source of pain. How many secret measures had he layered around my life without telling me? How much had he borne so I could be safe without shouldering the knowledge? Grief reshaped itself into something more complicated. Gratitude braided with the sting of exclusion. I replayed the video until my eyes blurred, memorizing the cadence of his speech, the way his jaw worked when he mentioned Sophia, the faint tremor when he said my name. This wasn't a throwaway reassurance. It was a legal backup, a well-laid trap. It meant Edward had anticipated betrayal in ways my mourning heart had never imagined. I carried the drive to Charles immediately. He met me in his office with a level that was all business now. No more bedside gentleness, no hesitating sympathy. He inserted the USB into his secure machine, cross-checked timestamps, and exhaled as though he'd been holding his breath for days. "We need to call this in," he said. "And not just to the police." He reached for his phone and dialed a number I couldn't hear. After a brief conversation, his face settled into something like grim satisfaction. Detective Maria Gonzalez at the Chicago Police Department is already familiar with cases that cross into federal territory. I've briefed her. She's on her way to our office, and we'll get petitions filed to freeze any accounts and secure assets tied to the estate. Within hours, I watched from Charles's corner office as a kind of legal net dropped over Sophia and Nathan. Bank holds, emergency freezes, subpoenas. Terms that had felt like abstract threats a day earlier were now being applied with crisp efficiency. It was astonishing how quickly the machinery could move when the right levers were pulled. My phone vibrated in my coat pocket. Sophia's name lit the screen. Frantic, breathless. I let it go to voicemail, my thumb hovering as her message began with a panicked, "Mom, please, there's been a mistake. Someone has frozen our accounts, and we can't access anything. You have to tell them it's wrong." When I called back and heard her voice, the practiced softness that had once soothed me down to a brittle core. She sounded small and raw, like a child caught mid-play and discovered. For a moment, something old and reflexive rose in me, a hope that perhaps she was still the daughter I had known, that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. Then I remembered the house door shutting behind me, her watchful glance as I folded my life into suitcases, Nathan's folded bills like an apology. I thought of the documents Charles had shown me, the weight of Edward's careful provisions, and the image of my daughter smiling politely as she told me I had to go. There was no room for mercy in that memory. "No mistake, Sophia," I said, my voice cold and steady, a calm I hardly recognized as my own. It felt like a shield. "You forged a will and forced me out of my home. You tried to steal my life. The authorities will determine what that means. For now, the accounts are frozen and the estate is protected. You will have to answer for what you did." Her cry on the line was immediate and raw. "Mom, please." But I had already closed the door on that version of our relationship. Listening to her panic, I felt the strange, fierce comfort of being on the side of truth. Edward had known what he was doing when he left me those protections. He trusted me with the key to make them work. Outside Charles's window, the city moved on, traffic, people hurrying, an indifferent world. Inside, for the first time since Edward's death and Sophia's betrayal, the tide had shifted. The night's anonymous package had brought more than a video. It had handed me a way back into my own life, a legal backbone to support the furious, careful justice I now intended to pursue. The night was heavy with summer heat, the air outside the Starlight Lodge thick and oppressive. I sat on the edge of the creaky bed, the USB drive resting in my palm like a talisman. Edward's voice still echoed in my memory. Measured, steady, protective. His words had become both shield and weapon. I knew the confrontation was coming, and I knew I had to be ready. It didn't take long. Around 11, headlights swept across the thin curtains of the motel window. A car door slammed, then another. My pulse raced, but I refused to shrink. Sophia's knock was hurried, almost desperate, followed by Nathan's deeper voice calling my name. I opened the door. There they stood, stripped of the polished confidence they usually wore. Sophia's eyes were red-rimmed, her hands twisting together. Nathan's jaw was tight, but his stance betrayed unease. They weren't predators tonight, they were cornered animals. Me, Sophia began, her voice trembling in a way I hadn't heard since she was a child. We just want to talk. Please, can we come in? I stepped aside, though my silence was louder than any words. They entered the small room, looking strangely diminished under the dim yellow light. Sophia perched on the chair, her knees close together like a schoolgirl about to confess. We didn't mean for things to go this far, she said. We only wanted to protect you, to make sure you weren't taken advantage of. You're not used to handling money, to making big decisions. I laughed, sharp and humorless. Protect me? Is that what you call throwing me out of my own house with 2 suitcases? Forcing me into a motel like this? Nathan cleared his throat, stepping forward as though he could salvage control. We can fix this. Look, we're willing to give you $3 million in the house. All you need to do is withdraw the complaint. No police, no court. Everyone walks away with something. I stared at him, then at Sophia, who nodded as though this were a generous offer. A wave of cold anger swept through me. For years I had cooked their meals, pressed their clothes, kept their birthdays alive with cakes and candles. For years I had been the quiet constant in the background. And now, when stripped of everything, they dared to act as though they were being magnanimous. Without a word, I took out my phone and opened the video. Edward's face appeared on the small screen, his voice filling the shabby room. Janet, if you're watching this, it means Sophia has gone too far. I know her ambition, her hunger. I added a clause to protect you. If she treats you poorly, she loses everything. Sophia froze. Her lips parted as though to argue, but no sound came. Color drained from her face. She sank into the chair, her body folding as though the weight of her father's words pressed her down. Her eyes brimmed with tears. Beau wouldn't do this to me, she whispered, shaking her head. He loved me too much. I closed the phone, the silence after Edward's voice ringing louder than any accusation. He didn't do this to you, Sophia, I said, my voice even controlled. You did this to yourself. You chose greed over love, deceit over family. Your father only prepared for what he feared might come true. And you proved him right. The room hung still for a long moment. Then came the sharp knock at the door, followed by the sound of heavy boots on the motel walkway. Police voices called out, crisp and commanding. The door opened wider and Detective Maria Gonzalez stepped inside, her badge gleaming under the weak light. Behind her, uniformed officers fanned out. Sophia's head jerked up, eyes wide. No, please, this is a mistake. Mom, tell them. Tell them this isn't. But the officers moved with practiced precision. Handcuffs clicked around her wrists, then Nathan's. His protest, angry, self-righteous, was drowned out by Gonzalez's calm authority. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, she said, addressing them both. You are under arrest for fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy to falsify legal documents. Sophia wept openly now, struggling against the officer's hold. Nathan cursed, his face twisted with fury, but there was no power left in his words. The law had spoken and the net had closed. Detective Gonzalez turned to me, her expression softening. Mrs. Harper, I thought you should also know. Nathan's fingerprints are all over this. He used his connections in real estate to create forged paperwork, deeds, and financial statements. This wasn't just Sophia's doing. It was a long, calculated scheme. I nodded, though the information was less surprise than confirmation of what I already suspected. Watching them being led out of the room, I felt no triumph, no gloating. Only a deep, steady ache. Betrayal always carries its own kind of grief, even when justice follows. As the squad car doors closed outside and the red-blue lights painted the motel walls, I sat back on the bed. For the first time in weeks, the air felt different, lighter, cleaner. Edward's careful foresight, Charles's diligence, Gonzalez's determination. They had all converged to lift me out of the darkness Sophia and Nathan had tried to bury me in. I knew the road ahead would not be simple. Courtrooms, testimonies, and headlines would follow. But the fear that had once kept me small was gone. I had faced my daughter's betrayal head-on and endured. I had listened to Edward's voice not as a widow clinging to memory, but as a woman armed with truth. And that truth had set me free. 6 months had passed, and I stood in the center of my newly renovated kitchen, the morning sun pouring through the wide windows. I lifted a cup of coffee to my lips, savoring the rich warmth and the simple fact that the cup, the kitchen, the very walls around me were all chosen by me. For the first time in decades, I wasn't living in someone else's shadow. This home was mine, and it carried the fingerprints of my rebirth. Paintings I had made in late-night bursts of creativity, shelves lined with novels I'd always meant to read, and photographs of moments that belonged to me alone. When Edward was alive, I had devoted myself entirely to him and Sophia. But after betrayal cracked my world open, I learned the strength of building anew. With the resources Edward had left, and the truth that set me free, I chose not just to rebuild for myself but also to give back. $10 million went into creating the Janet Harper Foundation, a project that became the heartbeat of my second act. The foundation focused on supporting elderly individuals who had been victims of financial abuse, offering them legal aid, housing support, and counseling. We also launched scholarships for children from struggling families, so the cycle of desperation and exploitation could be broken before it began. I often thought back to the nights in the motel, when I felt like I had nothing but the sound of my own fear. Now, every letter I received from someone who had been helped by the foundation felt like proof that my suffering had been transformed into something larger than myself. Meanwhile, justice had taken its course. Sophia and Nathan were convicted of fraud and elder abuse. Their sentences, 15 months in prison, might have seemed light to some, but for me it was less about the years and more about the recognition that their betrayal was seen, named, and punished. In prison, Sophia began writing to me. Dozens of letters arrived over the months, each one filled with apologies, regrets, and pleas for forgiveness. I kept them stacked in a drawer unopened. Not because I hadn't forgiven her, deep down I had. But I no longer wished to live my life in reaction to her words. Forgiveness, I realize, doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it simply means setting down the burden and walking forward. One spring morning, as I was tending to my small garden, I received an unexpected call. A documentary producer wanted to tell my story. They described it as the tale of a woman who refused to be broken, who had turned betrayal into strength. The working title was The Woman Who Would Not Bow. I hesitated at first, wary of turning my private pain into public spectacle. But then I thought of all the people who might see themselves in my journey, the silenced mothers, the dismissed wives, the ignored elders. So I agreed with one condition. Every dollar the film made would go directly to the foundation. If my story was going to be told, it would serve a purpose beyond me. As I sat with the cameras later that year telling my truth, I felt an unfamiliar lightness. Not because the pain was gone, it never fully disappears, but because I had finally taken ownership of it. My scars had become part of my strength, woven into a story that was no longer just about loss, but about rebirth. Lessons I learned. 1. Trust your intuition. When something feels off, it usually is. I ignored my instincts about Sophia for too long, but listening to them eventually saved me. 2. Truth will always prevail. Lies can last for a while, but Edward's video and the real will prove that truth is patient. It waits for the right moment to shine. 3. Independence is power. For years, I believed I was just a housewife, dependent and small. Now I know I am capable of leading, creating, and protecting. 4. Every choice has consequences. Sophia and Nathan's actions cost them dearly. Justice isn't only about punishment. It's also about lessons written into the future. 5. Pain can lead to rebirth. Betrayal broke me, but it also forced me to rediscover myself. Without the darkness, I might never have found this light. And now, to you, the one listening to my story. If my journey resonates with you, if you've ever felt silenced, betrayed, or underestimated, let my story remind you that it's never the end. You can start again. You can create something new from the ruins. If this story has touched you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And more importantly, tell your story in the comments below. Your voice matters. Your truth deserves to be heard. Together, we remind the world that no one can erase a woman who refuses to bow.